Hi everyone, it's the AI Auntie back again. Last week, I explained what generative AI, also known as AI that creates, is all about and shared 3 practical strategies for non-technical professionals to leverage it confidently. Workplace adoption of generative AI in tech-forward firms has started as early as 2023, with broader adoption going on through the period of 2025. Now it's early 2026, and even though generative AI is still not yet universal across all sectors, we already have to deal with yet another job-changing technology called Agentic AI. If generative AI is AI that creates, think of Agentic AI as AI that does. If you imagine generative AI as a robot that speaks, then Agentic AI is about giving that robot hands and a toolbox. That's why the news has been talking about how AI coworkers can be expected to enter the white-collar workplace. Bots can now reach directly into our computers, as well as clicking on web pages to read and write information in various forms. This means we can configure bots to take on entire work processes, especially in tasks which are structured or stable. Think, for example, expense reports, contract reviews, data analysis, anything where you can specify clear steps and formats. In highly specialized or highly regulated industries, engineers might need to design custom agents for your company. But there's also a growing number of off-the-shelf subscriptions allowing you to get AI agents to work for you today. The easiest way to show how AI agents work is through demos. So I'll be walking through 3 examples. Demo number 1, Claude. Although not everyone is a computer programmer or necessarily aspires to be one, I want to show how AI-assisted coding, known commonly as vibe coding, puts half a software engineering team into everybody's pocket. The reason why I call it half instead of a full team, which is already somewhat generous, is because if you want to build a production-ready solution, you still need software engineering expertise to spot and address security vulnerabilities and to optimize the structure of the code. But it has never been easier for people to turn their ideas into simple solutions that solve specific problems you've encountered without having to pay a developer thousands of dollars. Here's one vibe coding example from my personal life. For sense-checking my social content ideas, I want to get input from several different language models to balance out any kind of biases that each individual model might have. So, I want Claude Code to create a multi-model chatbot which pings 5 AI models at the same time, the latest versions of ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, DeepSeek, and Kimi. When writing the instructions for Claude Code, I don't necessarily need to know exactly how each block of code is going to work, but I do need to give it enough detail on how I want the chatbot to work. Claude Code creates files directly in my computer, so I need to point it to the exact folder that I want it to work in. Also, I need to do 2 things before I begin. Firstly, to select plan mode so that Claude looks at the big picture and maps out the entire project before it starts to code. And secondly, to make sure I've selected the most capable model for reasoning, since it needs to plan out multiple steps of code and logic to do this. That's why among the 3 levels of Claude models, namely Claude Haku, Sonnet, and Opus, I work with Opus all the time when it comes to coding. The prompt you're seeing on the screen is also included in my description box so that you can copy, modify, and test it on your own projects too. You'll notice that I asked Claude to clarify anything where it needs more detail from me. And Claude actually prompted me with a few questions. That helps it align with the design choices that I want. You can also see how Claude comes up with a plan for my approval. I can look through everything in this multi-paragraph document, ask it questions, and then approve when I'm happy with the overall approach. Every time Claude writes code to my computer, it gives me the chance to review that code first before approving it. That's the default setting for Claude Code. And although some people switch it over to automatically approve all changes, I feel safer to eyeball everything before approving, so I know exactly what's being written into my computer. Here you can see me testing out the chatbot. It took about 8 minutes to plan and less than 2 minutes for Claude to write out the main script. In this first run, the chatbot worked for all the models except Kimi. So I copy-pasted the error message from Kimi back to Claude Code and asked it to fix the bug. And now voila! On round 2, it works. End to end, it took less than an hour to build a working chatbot. Lately, the news has covered a lot about the frenzy of raising lobsters in China. The lobster branding started because Peter Steinberger, the Austrian software developer who created the original concept that evolved from ClaudeBot to MoldBot to OpenClaw, used a red lobster logo for it. OpenClaw got popular because it set a new standard for the variety of independent tasks that AI can perform on a computer without any human oversight. But on the flip side, it's an experimental project, so it doesn't offer the level of cybersecurity protection that normal off-the-shelf software would be able to offer. Nonetheless, Chinese big tech players moved very quickly into building apps on top of it, and sending engineers to help members of the public install OpenClaw on their computers for free. The result is that millions of people now have a chance to experiment with how this technology can expand their capacity, and especially those who are looking to set up one-person businesses as a supplement or substitute for traditional employment. OpenClaw needs deep access to all aspects of your computer, your files, your emails, and your web browsers, which might be logged into the vendors or services that you use regularly. So whenever you ask it to do something useful, large parts of your digital life would be exposed. That's why some people have bought Mac Minis to test out OpenClaw without exposing their main computer or their personal data to potential hacking. But not everybody has the luxury of buying a dedicated computer just like that. So an affordable solution that comes today with a Claude Pro subscription is to try out Claude Cowork. Claude Cowork is still in research preview, which means that the features will be constantly updated and not everything might work perfectly out of the box. But that's what you can expect from a technology that's still very new and experimental. Here's how I chose the task that I want to assign to Claude Cowork. This involves a lot of steps if done manually, and is structured enough for me to describe it in detail to an agent. First, I select the folder that I want Claude Cowork to work in. This is always going to be the first step of any such workflow. Then, I tell Claude Cowork where to look for the files that I want it to work on. As a hygiene measure, I always ask Claude Cowork that it has read the correct information, and I give it a sense check on what and how many files it's supposed to find. This way I know that it's keeping up with all the information and context that I'm giving it before I give it specific instructions. You'll see that I changed the model from Claude Opus to Sonnet. This was my bad. I should have done that in the beginning. But I believe that this task doesn't need a ton of planning. It's really just reading, writing, and summarizing info. And so the mid-tier model, Sonnet, is perfectly capable of doing that. So you'll see here, in a matter of minutes, Claude Sonnet has generated a document from 23 weeks of my LinkedIn posts. After eyeballing that document, I'm like, I do feel that this is a little bit light. And so I checked in on the number of posts and the time frame that it captured to ensure that I'm clear about what was included or excluded. I realized that this was my bad. I have 3 weeks of posts that didn't make it into this compilation just because I didn't format them in the same way. And that's fine, because this really is enough, 6 months of data, for Claude to get a pretty clear picture of what I've written on LinkedIn. So after using Cowork to create this combined file with almost 6 months of posts, I put it into a Claude project to ask it to analyze how my LinkedIn voice has evolved over the months. You'll see that because I did this during peak hour when Europe has already started waking up, so Claude needed a little bit of prodding to keep on with this task, because I was also running out on my usage limits. But when I scroll through the document, although some of the details of my writing were slightly glossed over, it managed to bucket my narrative into 6 periods that corresponded to my shifts in focus and strategy, going from career transition to developing a clearly defined brand voice for my next objectives going into coaching and consultancy. So that's the kind of feedback that I wanted to get out of it. And this whole process took me less than 15 minutes. Lastly, let me explain why I want to demo Manus. Manus was a Chinese-founded, Singapore-incorporated AI startup that was acquired by Meta at the end of 2025. Why was Manus such an attractive acquisition target? It's because the scale and power of its wide research capabilities, where it can deploy hundreds of AI agents simultaneously, each with its own memory, to drive high-quality results on tasks involving huge amounts of information, was its main selling point. A Manus Pro subscription, which is what I have, is currently around $40 a month. So pricing-wise, it is a step up from Claude Pro. That's why I wanted to demo both Claude Cowork and Manus, so that you can see how having a more powerful tool enables you to do more complex projects, even though both of each are useful in their own ways. So let's test how it performs on an actual research task. I want to see what the web says about how AI is impacting the future of my former industry, performance marketing. Shall we go take a look? All right, so handing off a report task to Manus is not quite as hands-off as it may seem. I've got to steer my instructions to Manus towards what kind of information I want it to pull, within what date range, and point it towards specific types of sources that I want to focus on, but still allow it enough freedom to come up with a narrative so that it might be able to capture some of the things that I might not have thought of. I also want it to send the reference links so that I need to personally fact check the sources first and be responsible about the kind of info that I'm putting out into a public space. After watching this, here's the 2 key takeaways that I want to leave you with about AI agents. Firstly, they can save you lots of time by doing what we would normally have taken hours before the age of AI within minutes. Secondly, you can communicate with AI agents almost as if they are a colleague. Maybe the instructions that you give them are a little bit more structured than what you'd give to another human, but the output, hopefully, is also more predictable as a result. You'll need paid subscriptions to get the most out of Agentic AI tools, but they don't need to break the bank. My Claude subscription currently, as at March 2026, is $20 per month, and my Manus subscription is about $40 per month. That doesn't provide enough computing power to support an entire business if you're setting up an OPC, but for a small-scale creator like me, right now this is perfect for me to take any analysis involving large amounts of info off my personal plate and to leave it to the compute to do the heavy lifting. Hopefully, this inspires you to test out some of these tools on your own workflows too. Next week, I'll put the tools to work in analyzing trends from 12 months of global layoffs, and from there to glean some insights about where the kind of companies and sectors and job functions that have been hit by layoff have been trending towards. See you next week. And in the meantime, have a good week ahead. Bye-bye.